acknowledge we are gathered on the traditional territories of various Indigenous peoples. We further recognize our duty to support the achievement of the calls to action stemming from the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. So welcome to OTF Connects webinar. This is the third in our series of 4. We will have another one next Tuesday, and then we'll be having an additional one in French. I'd like to let you know that the chat line is open, and we'll set a time aside for questions at the end of our conversation this evening. My name is Joanne Myers, and for those of you that do not know me, I was a teacher in York Region for many years in the elementary panel, and I then taught at the University of Toronto for about 19 years and at OISE-UT, teaching primary specialist course for OISE-UT, and went on to finish my career in professional services at the Elementary Teachers Federation in the provincial office in Toronto, and had the great privilege of working closely with Lindy and Ian at OTF, specifically in the PLLP program. And I am enjoying retirement now, but also, as you can see, enjoying some part-time work as well, staying in the trenches as much as possible. And it's my pleasure this evening to welcome Nikita, who we're in conversation with this evening. And Nikita is from the Toronto District School Board. And I'm going to open it up to Nikita to talk to us about where she is right now, her school, and her present role. Welcome, Nikita.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending. It's such a pleasure to be here tonight. So as Joanne said, my name is Nikita. I am a secondary teacher with the Toronto District School Board. I'm currently a French teacher. For the past 6 years, that has been the primary subject that I've been teaching. I am also the ACL of Digital Relations and Library at my school, and I'm part of the Digital Lead Learners program within the board, which is just a group of teachers where we come together and we explore different educational technologies, and we try to incorporate digital tools and resources into our classes and our courses.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I should have said, tell us about your roles. Role.
There's a few, yeah.
Nikita, could you describe for us the first 5 or 6 years of your teaching experience and practice with examples of your own personal professional growth during that time?
So, of course, so the first, 6 years of, this is my 6th year of teaching, and the first 6 years, it has been a roller coaster of events, of emotions. COVID really changed education the past 3 years. And for me personally, COVID was that defining event that really helped me unlearn the inequitable and internalized practices that I was implementing in my classrooms for my first 3 years. And I'll go through the examples with that, but COVID really helped me reflect and begin to incorporate new equitable practices that really brought students that were systemically marginalized and underserved in our school systems and pushed to the sidelines. It really helped me transform my classroom into one where I could bring them into the conversation, let their voices and their lived experiences be at the forefront of my classroom. So let's just rewind, 6 years, we're going back to 2017. I am a new teacher, a graduate from Teachers College, and I was very, very fortunate to get a contract right out of Teachers College. I didn't have any OT experience or LTO experience. And that first year of teaching, I went from my mentor's classroom to my own classroom where I'm responsible now for 30 students and their French development. And looking back at that first year, there were so many moments of just self-doubt where I sat there and I would question, can I really do this? Was this the profession for me? I had so many moments where I just thought, I need to get out because I don't think I'm doing a good job. I didn't think I was a good teacher. And I know we all have those days. And for me, it was because my students, I built the relationships with them and we had that, personal connection. However, they just weren't engaged in my content. They just weren't they didn't have that love of learning French. And, I had students that were failing my classes, and I just didn't know what to do. And I thought maybe I just wasn't doing a good job. And looking back at that time, I realize now that my practices and what I was doing in my classroom at that moment, it was inequitable practices. And I was essentially, the product of the internalization of a system that needed changing. So, I was a student from 2000 to 2012 in elementary and high school. And I learned that the way to learn in school is you do a lesson, you do some practice, there's a test, and there's an assignment. That's it. That is what school is. And when I became a teacher, because I didn't have, the time to really find my teacher voice and my confidence and to question these practices, I went in and I did the same thing. I just repeated the system because I didn't want to rock the boat.
Yes.
You think it's not broken, they're not
Right.
fixing it, so it must be working. And looking back, I realized that this is not the only way that students learn. This is not the only way that students can demonstrate their understanding, their knowledge. You can't just base a student's progress and what their knowledge is on a test. That's not the only way. And even looking back, I had late penalties, which I learned, during COVID, late penalties were so inequitable because I was, a student. I remember distinctly Angelina. She was such a wonderful student I had. And she would continuously hand in her assignments a week late. And, originally her assignment would get an 80%, but all of these late penalties, because it was a department policy that I didn't question, her final mark would be a 70 because it was a week late. And that was not really a reflection of, who the student is and what she's capable of. And I wanted her to get that 80. So then I decided, let's do extra credit assignments or let's grade your homework, which again are inequitable practices because in building that connection, I learned that she had other responsibilities at home. She couldn't do extra credit. She didn't have the ability to get tutoring to help her with French. She had to help take care of, her other siblings. She couldn't do extra homework. So her mark was suffering. And then this then led to her just being disengaged. And that's when I started to doubt my abilities as a teacher. And, really looking back at that, I I've seen how I've changed, how I've reflected, and how I've evolved essentially. I
Yeah.
have that confidence now. My students are engaged and they're motivated. Instead of just having tests and assignments, I have a lot of practice. And instead of doing 20 evaluations, I do maybe 6 in the entire course, where the students then are really pushed to love learning and that learning process. And their grade and their assessment and that mark is just a bonus. It's second place. Rather
Right.
their learning is first. And I just really wanted to learn how I can motivate and engage my students. And really the one thing that I'd learned during COVID and when I moved to my current school is that my tasks that I had and the assignments, they weren't reflective of my students. So I needed to start, getting rid of the text that has been used for 10 years in this department at my first school about a young French boy, and he had a dilemma about choosing what animal is he going to adopt. That
Yeah.
was not relevant to my students' lives.
No.
That was not, they had no connection to it. So of course they weren't going to be engaged. And then when I got to my new school and I met, a bunch of great colleagues, and they pushed me to question these practices. And there were 3 really essential practices that I encourage everyone to ask themselves and to question is who is being represented in your learning, in your task, in your classroom? Who is disengaged and why are they disengaged? And whose voices are we hearing and whose voices are we missing?
Yes.
After I heard those questions, it was just like a light bulb. And I said, get rid of that text, about the little boy in France. Let's bring in text where my students can see themselves, where they have situations that they're actually, living and their experiences are being validated in the classroom. And let's make sure that they understand that they belong here. And once I did that, it was just a complete 180. My students, I haven't had any failures in the past few years. My students are all motivated. They do their homework, they do their assignments. They're loving French. And it's now, the department has flourished in the past 3 years. It has gone from, a small and just sort of dwindles every year to now we have a full section of grade 11 French and a waiting list. And we have,
Fantastic.
students going to grade 12. Like, it's absolutely mind-boggling what
Yeah.
happens when you stop and question the system and the practices that you're doing in your classes.
And kudos to you, Nikita, as a new teacher. One of the areas that I worked in a great deal at ETFO and with OTF, of course, was development of teacher professional judgment.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hearing you speak about here is your reflection, your questioning, and the confidence that you develop to say, okay, I'm going to use my teacher development professional judgment right now in terms of what I'm observing with my students in the classroom every day. That's amazing.
Exactly, because you see it and it's just a system that just keeps repeating.
Yes.
And in that first year, you kind of want to rock the boat and you want to go in there, change lives, you want to make some magic. But when you see everyone else around doing this, lesson, assignment, tests, and that's just the pattern, the routine, you're kind of nervous to say, I don't think this is going to work for my students. And it's only when I started questioning it and finding colleagues, at my school especially, they're so great and they're supportive of me questioning and changing these practices. Then you start to see these amazing results that start happening. And the kids, I mean, it's French class. Nobody really likes French class, but now they're running to class and they're excited to be there. So it's just, you have to figure out what works for your students and you have to question what has been done, because clearly it's not working for all of our students. So we got to change that a little bit.
Right. And that's your proof of success, the fact that they are running to the French class. That's it.
Yeah.
That's what you need to see. Okay, so what is next? How do you continue to keep growing? So you've talked about this magic and everything that evolved. What are your plans and goals for tomorrow? And how do you plan to keep pushing forward?
So I'm working on that right now. And I think doing this conversation, it really helped me with it. And like I said, COVID was my defining event. It changed my practice from the teacher. I was on a different path in my first 3 years to the one that I am today. It's on a completely different path. And to keep growing, I think what I do now is I have to start breaking down those walls I've built around my classroom where, I realized in my second year, those practices that I mentioned that were inequitable, like the late penalties and the grading of homework and the extra credit assignments and all of these things that I was doing that wasn't successful for all my students. I started changing them a little bit, but just in my classroom because I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to disturb other teachers because they're experienced teachers. I didn't know if this would be okay. So I built those walls around my classroom where I just practiced and, did experiments in my room. And I just saw the results that were amazing. Now I'm working on really breaking down those walls and sharing what I've learned and what really works in my classes, sharing them with other educators. So this is an opportunity, to share with other colleagues, other teachers, other individuals in this system, and to invite teachers to come in to see what a French class where all of the students are engaged and motivated, what it looks like. And then it was really funny in preparation for this a couple weeks ago. I have two really wonderful students, and they came to me and they said, they want to be teachers now in the future.
Well,
And I was so honored. I was like, so touched. And I said, that's great. I'm here to help you any way I can. And they said, Miss, they want to come and visit me in about 5-6 years when it's time so they can learn to be a teacher like me.
yes.
And that just like a light bulb just went off. And I said, how about to keep growing and to keep pushing forward, I now start working with teacher candidates so that when they get into that first year, they don't have
Good for
all
you.
those moments of, self-doubt. They're not in my position where I felt and I was questioning my abilities and I felt like I was just, thrown into the deep end with two floaties and said,
Absolutely.
swim. And and I don't know.
Maybe even one floaty.
Exactly, right? And it's like do 50 laps in a period and I don't know how to swim. So that's what it felt like in my first year. And I'm so scared because I'm new in a school full of teachers that have been there for 20 years. And I didn't have my confidence in my voice to say, I don't think this is working. We need to fix something. We need to address this. So I really think that's the next step for me, is maybe
Good for
start
you.
going to the beginning to teacher
Yes.
candidates and help them as well.
Absolutely. And for you to model for them that questioning that, they're probably thinking about, but not daring to take that step yet, but to have had that experience with you before they have their own classroom would be amazing.
Right.
How are you embracing new teacher practices, and how do you share those practices as a teacher leader? So you spoke a little bit about that right now, but maybe you have some other practical stories that you could tell us about your sharing.
So, so one of the new teacher practices that I've just, stepped into this role this year is I'm actually a mentor for a new teacher. And it just so, happens that that new teacher is my husband because we work at the same school. So it's brought a whole new level and dynamic to our relationship, but it's really and having that role now where I'm a mentor and I'm able to help support someone who's now entering the profession and learning about finding their teacher confidence and finding their teacher voice. It's really led me to really reflect on the choices that I make. And partly because he is like a kindergartner and he asks why to every single thing I do. It's always the question why. But I mean, like, for example, we were looking at a text a couple weeks ago, and he had found a text and he's like, this is great. It's about a young boy, I believe it was about 14 for our grade 9 students. And he was telling the story about, his school life, and he lived in North York. So we had mentions of Canada's Wonderland, Yorkdale, like things that the students would know.
Can relate to.
Exactly. And he's like, this is good. And I said, okay, that's great. And then I don't know why, when I continued, something about it just wasn't clicking for me. And then I found a text where it was about a young boy from Senegal who had immigrated to Canada and immigrated to Toronto. And he was talking about, discovering these new places and, fitting in at school and adjusting. And I said, that's the text. And he asked why, because, the other one, the kids know Wonderland.
It's a good fit. Yeah.
Exactly. And then, well, with him asking me why, it led to me really reflecting. And I said, I think this is a better text because, one, it's not a voice, it's not a white voice who the students have heard in French every single year growing up. It's the voice now of a young Black boy. That is important for our students to hear. They need, and a lot of our students have immigrated to Canada, have immigrated, and this is a new experience for them as well. They can connect to that on a whole other level than, a student that's lived here and that lives in a very good neighborhood and gets tutoring and gets to go to all of these attractions and places. Let's find something that's more relatable to our students. And, being in that role as a mentor, I wouldn't have thought of it because had I come across that text, I might have just used it. But because I was trying to model my thinking and explain why I'm doing this and asking those 3 questions, it led me to finding an even better text for our students. And it led to an even better, class and activity for them. And, in this role as a mentor, it's with my husband, there's a little bit of an advantage that I didn't have in my first year, which was my mentor was great. She was a wonderful teacher and supportive individual. But, being a young 22-year-old student, and, I call myself a student because I was still learning.
Yes.
I was terrified to say, hey, I don't think that's going to work for my class, or I don't think that's very appropriate, or I don't think that method or that practice is going to be a good fit. I just, said, I will do it because you are the experienced person. I am not. So I'm going to learn from you. And that's the one advantage I think my husband has, is because we know each other, we're obviously very, very, comfortable with one another. he's able to say, no, that's not going to work, and give me feedback. And we're able to keep building and having that conversation.
Yes, yes.
So it's good, I think, when you can, even if you have new practices and you're learning about them, question them, ask them, I don't
Absolutely.
think that's going to work. Let's figure out and let's talk
Yeah.
about it. And then you can learn, and even the person teaching you can also learn as well. And, and sharing those practices as a leader now in the school, especially with my POR as a digital relations teacher, essentially what that is I learn and I look for tools and resources that can allow students, all of our students, to engage and participate in our classroom. And why I really focus on that is because in my classroom, I'm a firm believer against putting up your hand to participate. I don't do that in my classroom. That is something I've really had to work hard on in the beginning of the semester and the course. Don't put your hand up to participate. This is an open community. It's a dialogue for everyone. You share whatever you're comfortable sharing at any time. And I don't want you to wait there, because that's where you start losing voices, because we know we have keen students who are always eager to put their hand up. They're the ones we're going to continuously call on without realizing it. And then we have disengagement because the ones in the back, or the voices that we typically don't get to hear, they're just going to be lost in all of the keeners' voices, and they're excited. So I always tell my students, don't put your hands up. It's a conversation. We're all learning together. We're all working together. I do not like it. And anytime they do put their hands up, because that's what they're used to. They've been doing that,
I was going to say it probably took them a while to transition.
It takes them so long, because, and even now, we're in November, December, and I'll still see a hand up, and I'm like, hey, remember, you can just say it out loud. Don't worry.
Yeah.
And, in the beginning, I got a lot of resistance because the kids, they told me, they're like, Miss, we're going to be loud. We're going to be noisy, and we're going to get in trouble. And I'm like, no, you're not. It's okay to be loud. It's okay to be it's okay for us to be, rowdy and have a little bit of ruckus in here. It means that we're taking the space up, we're learning, we are enjoying, and we are participating right now. And that's what I really want. So that's what, in part of my role, is I look for ways that we can include all of our voices without having that put your hand up. And an example, and something that I'm not sure if any of our viewers are aware of, is something called Peer Deck. And that is a tool that I always recommend, and it has changed my classroom into one where so many students feel comfortable, and they're happy to make mistakes and to fix it and to learn and to take risks. And essentially this tool, it's just an add-on to Google Slides. And what I do is, when I have a lesson and I'm teaching them whatever the skill is, throughout the slides, it's just these little tasks that make it more interactive. So now my students go from being passive learners, where I am teaching them, they're just getting that material, copying it down, and then regurgitating it. Instead, now they're becoming active, because throughout the lesson, they have to pause, and on their device, or because we have the one-to-one device program, everyone has a Chromebook or a phone.
Yes.
They they get to interact with the slides, and they get to do an activity. So it might be just like move a thumbprint, or write a sentence, or draw something, or whatever it might be. It's all anonymous. So if a student who we know is very shy to put up their hand because they're scared of making a mistake, when we look at the answers as a class and we go to discuss them, nobody knows who had that wrong answer.
Right.
Everyone feels like they're on the same playing
And nor
field.
does it matter, right?
It doesn't matter. And we say that's a learning experience, because when they make a mistake, I make mistakes, and I say, hey, I made a mistake. And if I can do it, you can do it. And if you're not judging me, I'm not going to judge you. And so that's really how we do it. And I use this tool, and it's just been amazing to see how students, they're excited now when I do a lesson.
And what did you
like,
say it was called again, Nikita?
It's just called Peer Deck.
Okay.
And it's just an add-on to Google Slides, because that's how I make my presentations. And the students, they do it anonymously. But the great thing about it is, as a teacher, I can then see a report afterward, and I can see, the students that weren't really getting it.
Yes.
And then I can tap on them without anyone knowing, and I can give them that additional support.
Right.
So I absolutely love that. And that's like an example of something like a resource and a practice that I've now incorporated where everyone is accessing my material, everyone is participating, everyone is engaged. And now, the kids, that's something that they love. They always ask, Miss, are we going to do one today? And when I say yes, you just see everyone get ready. Their devices are out. They're ready to like play. They call it playing, but
Yes.
they're interacting. They're using the skills without realizing that they're using it. And it's absolutely incredible just to see that change with just a simple add-on into Google Slides. And that was it. And it changed my classes for them.
Well, everything that you're talking about is providing them with ownership of their environment in terms of not putting up their hand, building that community. And this is doing the same thing as well, right? Pulling them in,
Exactly.
involving
Right.
them.
It's
Excellent.
yeah.
As a French language teacher, how do you boost confidence in the French students so that they embrace the program? And you talked about the fact that they're now, rushing to come to French. Describe the motivational practices specifically that you facilitate, and maybe tell us some of the student responses that you've seen, some individual responses as well.
Yeah. So, with French, confidence and French don't usually go hand in hand. The kids come in, and I see it every year. The first day, especially with grade 9 French, they come in there and they already have a wall up. They do not want to be there. If I could get $1 for every time I've heard a kid say, just need to get a 50 and then I don't have to do French again. That is like, it's something that you hear from the very first day.
Yes.
And you have to, so what I learned in my first few years, I didn't do this. And the confidence in French wasn't there. Some of the students had that confidence, the ones that knew they were good in French, the 90s students, they had the confidence. Not the ones that, were in the 50s or the 60s or even lower. But now, after COVID, when, we went remote and I never got to meet my students, that's when I started to change things, because what I started to do and what I do right now is in the first week of my class, I tell the students, and this gets their attention right away. I say, there's no work right now. We're going to put away the diagnostics. We're going to put away the course outline. We're putting away everything in French right now. What I want them to do is I want to take this time to get to know the students, let them, learn about me, and
Yes.
make them comfortable in the space and in the classroom. And that is like the goal in my first week, is just feel comfortable coming to class. If you
Yes.
feel comfortable to come to class and you feel safe and like you belong here, your confidence is slowly going to grow.
I'm going to
And
surpass that 50.
exactly, it starts, and then after you start seeing these students start to feel comfortable in the space, you don't hear that anymore. I don't hear it at all. After that first week, I very rarely hear it. And when I do, I meet with that student. I try to figure out how I can like engage them back and feel comfortable in the space. But otherwise, my students know this is their space and they have a sense of responsibility for the classroom. So in that week, yes, I do the icebreakers and whatever, just to get to know their names and all of that. But then, I say, make something that represents you. And then that goes up in the classroom. If it's, my artist, like the artists in my class, they make something and then that goes up in the room. So then they see it. When they come in here, they feel a sense of pride. Hey, my stuff is up. When you walk in, before you even walk into my class, the first thing I do is, before my students come in, I decorate my door and I change it and I have like some sort of thematic design on the door and I put their names on it. And it's just something, so simple, so easy, putting their names. My name is up there and it's the same size as the students. So they know that we're equals in this
Yeah.
space. And, I hear that all the time. Oh, my name's on the door. This is my classroom. And as soon as I hear this is my classroom, I know that they feel comfortable. They know this is their space, they're responsible, and they're welcomed here. And then just by doing that and making them feel at ease in the class, building that community with everyone where they know they're not going to be judged by, mispronouncing a word in French, I see them making mistakes and they're okay with it, taking risks and they're okay with it, putting themselves out there and they're okay with it. And, just by doing that, I've seen students, and I had this one student, super, super quiet. Like she would not say a word at the beginning of the semester. And she's just a very quiet student. Talking to other teachers, found out she's the exact same way, very quiet student. And by helping her, feel comfortable in this space and get a sense of responsibility, at the end of the year or the class, it was right before the winter break last year, and there was a talent show, a virtual talent show, and my class said they want to do a French dance to a French song.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what, sure, let's do it, because that was the community we built where everyone felt comfortable, even though none of us were dancers, none of us knew how to do anything. We all felt comfortable putting this together and doing it. And then that very, very quiet student who was like very adamant, didn't really want to like talk or participate or do anything, she put her hand up and said, Miss, can I also be in the dance? And she felt comfortable,
Yes.
with these students, that they won't judge her. They're not going to, and even if it wasn't to do with French speaking or anything like that, but just to show the community that was built in this class,
Yep.
and that confidence, where after we did the talent show and after she put herself out there with her classmates having her back, you could not stop her from talking French. She
Yes.
felt so comfortable to, share her ideas, make mistakes. If she mispronounced something, she was perfectly okay to be corrected and to learn how to fix that mistake. And it was, it was just so incredible to see, by just taking a couple of days to get to know the students and figure out one thing that I can connect with each student on,
Right.
how their
And breaking
confidence.
down that French mindset that, I'm listening to you thinking that was me in grade 9. And if I had had you, maybe I would have continued taking French past grade 9. But it's breaking down the barriers in that mindset for them to realize that this is another subject that we're going to embrace and celebrate, even with dance at a talent show.
Exactly. And that's how you get into the motivation. So like a specific example that I did, and I'm so incredibly proud, and this is how I get, my students motivated, is I I make them a part of the planning process, like very active members of the process. I pitch an idea and I'm like, hey, this is what we're gonna learn next. What are your ideas? What are your opinions? What do you think we should do? How do you want to show me what you're going to learn? And I remember at our school last year, it was such a great initiative. Every Thursday, we would have a mental health moment where, everyone would stop in the school and we would do like a mental health pause or activity for about 20 minutes.
Yes.
And then we'd go back to our classes, which was great. Now I had, 3 students, Manira, Manali, and Jasny. These were great, wonderful girls. They came up to me and they said, Miss, why is it that we have that little pause and then everything goes back to normal? We've been through so much with COVID. We don't have anywhere that we can express and we can learn about our mental health. And so I said, well, how about we do it in French class? They're like, well, that's not really the place to do it because it's French. And I said, but why can it not be?
Right.
So, the unit I had planned, I had said, let's scrap that, all of the prep and planning. I said, let's just get rid of it. And we came together as a class and we built this mental health unit in our class, and for grade 10 French. And it was all done in French. The students brainstormed all of these issues that, adolescents face. They took the issues and they found, problems and situations that teenagers find themselves in. And then together as a class, they went through and each of them found strategies to help with those specific issues and problems. And then they found community resources. And that was it. So this way, if anyone had any of those mental health crises, then, they can find these resources within our community and get that support. And then with that, they were so proud of their work and what they did and how they built this unit, that I turned it into a mental health magazine for them, and I put it all together and I gave it to them when they left my class. And I said, here you go. If you ever need support, I'm here, but here's also your classmates are here. This is what they found to help each other. And it was just so incredible to see the motivation. Even now, when I talk to them, they say that was one of their favorite units they've ever done because they were in charge. They were the ones that was doing, everything. And I was there just helping to facilitate all of it and doing, the little bit of the marking and all of that stuff that we have to do. but it was really driven by the students. And
Yes.
it was just the motivation. It's incredible to see, they were so happy to see their work put together. And even if it was published just in our class, they felt so proud and they felt so
Absolutely.
confident. It
And
was
again, I'll say it still goes back to your teacher professional judgment to say, I'm okay to put the curriculum aside
Yeah.
right now. This is what my students are telling me what they need. I would imagine if you went back and looked at that unit and compared it to the curriculum, you could probably check off 100
exactly,
things that you covered in a way that was more important to those students at the time. The other
exactly. And
thing that I'm
that's,
thinking right
yeah.
now is that probably every viewer that we have this evening is saying, could you share that unit with us, please?
Yes, I can because it was so incredible. And it was something I never thought about.
Yes,
And, again, like the kid said, French is not the space to do that because this is, we have the curriculum. And
yeah,
then looking back and thinking about it, yep, I covered, all the curriculum strands that I needed to
yeah,
just by doing that unit because everything was done in French,
yes,
except now it was relevant to their lives and they got something out of it. It was meaningful to them and it supported them and
yes.
what they needed at that time.
In my courses at the University of Toronto, I used to say, instead of us saying that we covered the curriculum, we uncover it. And that's, I think, what you were doing. You're uncovering the curriculum as opposed to actually covering it is what we need to move away from. And I just saw Heather in the chat say that, this is absolutely brilliant and that these students will remember this for the rest of their lives, and they will as adults. Like you're teaching life skills while you're uncovering the French curriculum. So good for you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was such a great time.
Oh,
And
that's
just to
amazing.
see them taking charge, it was incredible to see
And
what
such, I mean, mental health, like such a priority right now in these young students' lives that
exactly.
so needed. And especially after COVID, has to be a
Exactly.
priority because who are they speaking with? And you developing that community of conversation and communication and authenticity.
Yeah. And
Congratulations. Yeah.
thank you. It was just such a wonderful experience just to see that on the sidelines. So that's something that, thinking about it in my first year and learning about teaching, I'm in the center of the classroom and I'm sharing my knowledge. That was what I learned and what I
Yes.
saw. However, after COVID, I did that reflection, and this was a prime example of it, was I took a step all the way to the back and I said, you all are at the center now. I'm just going to help where I can because, we need an adult in the room. Let me
Yes.
see what I can do to
Uh-huh.
help. And I have a little bit more knowledge in French, and I will
Yes.
share that. But you all also have a little bit more knowledge than I do in other subjects. Let's share that as well. And let's put it all
Yes.
together. And that's really what I've done in my classroom is I've stepped all the way to the back and I said, you all are now in the center. This is your space. I'm just here to walk around and, just help out whenever I can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you've touched on a little bit of this already, but just in case there's something else you'd like to add to this. So how you're managing the expectations of your students and their goals. It doesn't sound like classroom management is an issue because you've set up that respect and the idea of not having to put the hand up. How do you ensure the students at your school are always the primary focus? And you have demonstrated that in your stories tonight, but if there's something that you'd like to add.
Yeah, and just with that word there, classroom management. So, in teachers college, that's what we hear all the time. Classroom management, the first couple of years, that's all I heard, that's all I used was classroom management. And then it just clicked. I can't remember the PD that I attended, but it was just incredible. And that word management, it was always bugging me. It
Yeah.
sounds like I'm a manager and this is a business and these are my employees that I
Yeah.
am ordering them to do something. And that's what just didn't stick with me. And then I changed it to classroom community. And once I said that, it all made sense. I said, you know what? We're all responsible for this space. What happens here is our responsibility. No classroom management issues. It became a community, in the beginning. And one of the examples that I see often in all of the schools I've been at is, lateness. And the students are always walking in, 10, 15 minutes late. And that's an issue we struggle with a lot, and it goes under classroom management.
Yeah.
And even though, I have this room where the students have responsibility within it and they know like our expectations are high, and I welcome them and I love having them in my room, they still come in late. And it was, I can't remember, it was a session, and somebody said the question that we ask, when a student comes in, the automatic question we ask is, why are you late? Just by asking that question, we're putting the blame on that student.
Yeah.
We are, putting that
Put 'em
spotlight
on
on
the
them.
wall, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, why would they want to come back? We just kind of pointed them out in front of their classmates. We've put that target on them and we've put the blame on them.
Yeah.
Then after it hit me, don't say, why are you late? And I've changed that language with what I use with my classes. And when a student comes in late, I say, thanks for coming. I'm glad that you made it. Or, hey, you made it just in time for the lesson. Let's get started. Or, oh, we were waiting for you. After I started changing the sentences and the language that I was using, the students, I remember there's a distinct group of students. In the beginning of the year, they would come in 15, 20 minutes late from lunch. They, would walk down to the mall, whatever. And after I started changing the language, and I said, I'm so happy y'all made it. Like, come on in, let's get started. They actually were coming in 10 minutes before lunch ended. They were like running there and coming back in time for French. And when I said, what changed? Because I wanted to make sure it was the language, and I wanted to make sure that they felt comfortable in this space. They just said, Miss, well, we don't want to, disturb the class. We want to be here and we want to hang out with you right before lunch ended. Just by changing the question that I was asking these students, got rid of all of those issues that, I was seeing.
And the atmosphere
Exactly.
for them, right? Like they may never have wanted to share with anyone why they were late.
Exactly.
And it makes me think too of like all the years of me doing courses at ETFO or teaching at the University of Toronto. Adults came in late all the time and walked into my workshop or my evening class. And basically I had one word, welcome.
Yeah.
And they sat down and away we went. And I never would have gone up and asked them afterwards, why are you late? And so you're treating them as young adults with respect, and they're responding to that, obviously.
Exactly. And that really, it was a PD I attended not too long ago. And I can't remember the name of the presenter, but she had this quote from, I believe it's Dr. Alfred Tatum. It was his quote. And
Yes.
it just stuck with me. It was just, you can't engage me if you don't know me. And just by doing that, like, you can't engage me if you don't know me, meaning I have to take the time to learn about my students, learn about their interests, their lived experiences, and find the geniusness within every single student.
Right.
Once I do that, they have that sense of belonging. They want to be there. They see that they're welcome. They see that they belong in my room, and they come. They're not late anymore. They're engaged. They come in, they're prepared. I see it all the time. My kids come in and they're running to tell me about what happened in their lives. And because they know I know them and they're
it
ready.
reminds me of the excitement in grade 1 and grade 2 in primary. And yet here you have it in high school and French.
Exactly, which you don't really see.
No.
And, it's just those simple little things, changing the question. And as Toni Morrison, I remember that talk. It was so amazing. She said, does your face light up when a student walks into the room? Every child wants to be seen. And just that, when I heard that and I saw the video, I said, that's it. When my students walk in, even if something is going on in my personal life, my face, I light up because I'm like, yes, you're here.
Exactly.
You made the effort to show up. That already is engagement. You showed up to class. You're engaged. Let me see what I can do now to keep you here and keep you interested in my class and motivate you and push you to do better. And so that is, it's absolutely life-changing when and it just raises the expectations of your students. And one of the questions I remember in teachers college that we were asked was, are we seeing the genius in front of us? And that I remember distinctly in my second year was, before I had interpreted as, are we seeing, the smart kids, the ones that are, achieving really well, because the genius. And then I realized in my second year, there was a student, her name was Kayla, and very quiet, just like the average student with 75% in her grades. And that question somehow just popped into my mind. It was like 3, 4 years after I had already become a teacher and stuff, and I've done this class. And it was just, are we seeing the genius in front of us? And just by getting to know her, I realized that she was an incredible singer and composer. And, she didn't really want to write essays, but if you asked her to compose a song, it was incredible. That's what she would love to do. And just by seeing the genius, what makes her extraordinary, and making a space in my class for her. So instead of, showing me that you can support your point in an essay, I left it more open. And she did it in the form of a song that she composed. And it was a very long song and it was incredible. She showed her point. She supported her opinion. She did it in a different way. And it just skyrocketed. She went from a 75, sort of just doodling in her book and kind of there, but kind of not, to sitting in the front, wanting to participate, wanting to share, because I learned about her genius. We have to find what makes each of our students extraordinary and make the space for them. And once we do that, they know they belong. And then all of our expectations, our goals, and they know they're the primary focus of our classroom. That's when you do it.
And they may not know it themselves. So for you to find it and celebrate it is what they need to be successful. Okay, I have 2 more questions and then we'll go to questions from our viewers. How do you define student success as a team outcome with the perspective of our students as opposed to my students?
So for me, success is not about the marks. And my students, I'm very transparent from the beginning of the course. I tell them success is not about your grade. If you get a 90 versus a 50, I am just as proud of you and your progress. For me, success, and I tell my students this, that you showed up to class today, hey, that's a win. You're happy, you feel safe, you feel comfortable, welcomed, included in this space. That's a success. You feel it in all of your classes. We are, exceeding these expectations. We are more than successful. And if you get your credits, hey, that's a bonus.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. And then that changes the narrative.
Yeah,
exactly. Right. And it changes your narrative from my students to our students, because then it starts trickling into the other classes. They start showing up in their classes. They start to feel, they go to their other classes. It starts expanding with other teachers that you start building this with, and you start asking about, how is this student doing in this class? Not about their grade. Are they happy in that class? Are they engaging? Let's figure out how we can make sure that it's flowing throughout all their classes. And once that student really feels that they belong in this building, they will succeed and they will thrive, and they become our students where everyone is looking out for them. And that brings the focus beyond marks and report cards. And, as you said earlier, I tell my students, in 10, 15 years, you're not going to remember that you got a 72 in French. You're going to remember how you felt, how this was a safe and happy space for you. And that's really my goal. And I take the first few days to really help them learn to, love learning, to want to be there, to want to show up, to feel welcomed here. And just by doing that and not doing, one thing that I've noticed that we as teachers, and I've done this many times, is we just keep giving, handouts or worksheets because it's easy. It's easy for us to get, feedback.
Cover the curriculum.
Exactly. And then when I started realizing, because I did that my first year or two, I started changing a little bit, because I figured this was sort of getting repetitive. I was getting tired. And if I'm tired, the kids are definitely tired of this. And I started finding different ways for them to practice and for them to demonstrate how they're learning. Here's like a video. Let's do something there on Edpuzzle. Let's do something here. And let's play a game, and let's do different things. And you started to see that it wasn't no longer the question, what's my mark? It turned into, what can I do to improve or be better? That was it. And they weren't, when they got their activity back or whatever, they weren't looking at the mark. They were looking at, oh, I made a mistake here. Miss, how can I fix this? How do I not make this mistake again? Yes. And, it was absolutely incredible because, and that it was this time, I remember last year, I had done this escape room in my class. I created this activity with the
Yeah.
students, all in French. And it was this one student, after doing the activities and the challenges and whatever it might have been, she came up to me, she's like, Miss, I'm surprised at how much I know and I remember. And, and I feel happy that, I can do this now. I don't feel like French is a chore. And once I started doing that, you just saw the success. She started to feel really confident. It goes back to that confidence, right? Confidence leads to
Intrinsic
success.
reward. Yes.
Exactly.
Mm.
Right. So, and then she started asking, what can I do to be better? What can I do to improve? The whole what's my mark? I very rarely hear that now in my classroom. And it's a great question to not hear anymore and to now have replaced with what can I do to be better? What can I do to improve?
And you invested the time and the changes and took the risks and helped the students take the risks to get there. So
exactly. Yeah.
okay, last one, Nikita, and then we'll go to questions from the viewers. How do you think you will move forward to taking your practice and this profession to an even higher level with your students?
So the one thing that I will keep doing that I've learned now, after that first really bad year and the first 3 years that were really difficult, the one thing that I learned now is continue to listen to your students, put them at the center of your classroom and take a step back. That is what I will continue to do. And, I know and I can acknowledge that I still have a lot of unlearning to do. And I want to make sure that my practices are equitable and that there's room for me to grow as an educator. And I'm excited to learn how I can improve. Just like my students, I need to make mistakes and I need to learn. And I need to ask that question, what can I do to be better? And, as I continue to unlearn and to meet with other educators and see what works in their classroom and to share what works in mine and to keep building that network and hopefully, moving on to working with teacher candidates and seeing, the fresh ideas that they have and not putting them into that box where it's just tests and assignments and do a lesson, but opening that box and seeing all the ideas they have, I know that I'm going to improve greatly. And then eventually, our students will ultimately be better. We're going to serve them better. We're going to have the space where all students are welcomed and no one is no longer on the sidelines or in the background. They're all there at the front and they're all running to French class or math class or whatever it is.
Exactly.
That's really the next thing is I just want to keep moving forward and listening to my students, giving them that power and that responsibility changes your classroom and asking them, what do you want to do? That's what I have to do, keep doing.
And honoring their voices.
Exactly.
Well, oh my gosh, you're making me want to go back to the classroom. This is absolutely wonderful to hear your stories and to hear your successes and your accomplishments and the risks that you've taken and the practical examples that you've given us to show exactly how this has been rolling out with you and your students. And I know on behalf of everyone that's joined us this evening, a huge thank you for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
For this short journey so far. To think that you're just at the beginning of this journey, I'm thinking, Lindy, in 10 years, you have to have Nikita back to say, where are you now and what are you doing now?